Hi, welcome to our video about demand in the market. This is a very important part of the agribusiness sector, and I want you to be an active learner and take notes along the way. I'm also going to ask a few questions, so make sure that you pay attention to those and make sure your notes allow you to identify those topics. Maybe questions that come back to you later. All right. Let's talk about demand in the marketplace. Demand is part of the market. In fact, it's an essential part. Demand must always be there, but so must supply be. But we're talking about demand, and so demand is the wants and needs of a consumer. In fact, demand is derived from the numbers of consumers that are in the marketplace. Also, it's derived from the amount of money these consumers have to spend. The more money they have to spend, the more demand might be influenced. It also is going to relate to consumer preferences in the marketplace, and as well as the taste of consumers as far as what they want. So demand is wants and needs. It's resulting from the numbers of consumers, amount of money, preferences, and taste that consumers have in the market. The more that exist of any of these variables, the higher demand will be. But let's talk about how demand is framed. What is demand a relationship of? Well, it's a relationship of taste and preferences, but I can draw a picture of what demand looks like, and it's going to be a balance of the price that consumers have to pay for these products they demand, and then the quantity that they will want to buy. And so that kind of sets the stage up for us to talk about demand. And then I want to look at an example using kind of an environment of today. All right, prices. When prices are high, so when you write your graph here, you're going to write when prices are high, go way up to the top. Of course, this little area of the X and Y axis is 0. So if prices are way up here, how much do people typically want to buy? And the answer is going to be a low price, a low quantity, excuse me. So high prices and low quantities usually connect to a relationship like this. Now, when prices are lower, then people actually will buy, what would you guess, a higher quantity. And so when prices are low, we typically end up with this. So now there's a lot of room between here and here, but if I draw a line that connects these, that is the typical relationship of demand in the market. So there is not a positive relationship between these two, but a negative relationship. So a high price of this value will yield a low quantity here. So let's just call that price 1 and quantity 1. If you have a lower price where the price drops for some reason in the market, then that is going to give us a higher price because of that relationship. So all along this curve, if you raise the price, so if these values go up, then, and I'm going to put situation A here, then these quantities go down with situation A as well. Or if you have another situation where you have the resulting prices are dropping, let's call that B, then you're going to have the resulting quantities going up, and then we'll put a B in there as well. All right, so that's the typical relationship of price and quantity. Now, this line that I drew could have been drawn lots of different ways. In fact, let's draw it a couple of other ways. You could have a relationship between price and quantity that is a lot more flat, and so we're going to call that a demand type curve. And then let's do another demand where prices are, I can find the right pin here. Yeah, where prices are not in this type of relationship, but let's draw it where it's very straight up and down, flat. These two types of demands give us different relationships. In fact, you can see in this particular relationship, when you have a demand curve that's very straight up and down, then price might change a lot. In fact, if we kind of connect up these lines here, price could change by this amount like P1 and P2 did, but you end up with a change that's smaller. So when you have this type of demand, you can have a big change in price, and then you have a small quantity change that relates to it. And that all is happening because the slope of this demand curve is of a certain slope. The relationship is different. Now, if we take the relationship up here, where we have price and quantity but almost pretty flat, in fact, you can't even really get to it, this price change way out here is going to create a quantity, and this price change, it is way out here. And so you can see that this has in this particular case, has a small change in demand price, but a huge, large change in quantity. So here there are two different demands. This demand that's very flat, where quantity is a huge change from a change in price, we call that an elastic type of demand. In other words, it's very elastic, it's very stretchy. If this price changes in at all, this demand curve is so almost flat that a change here is going to cause a huge change in quantity. So that's called elastic demand. This demand curve, where the line is fairly straight up and down, is called inelastic. It does not stretch much. And that's because when the price changes of products, quantity does not change that much. Now, one thing's true of all demand curves, no matter if it's elastic or inelastic or somewhere in the middle. These demand curves always have a negative relationship between price and quantity. When price goes up, quantity does drop for whatever reason. So that brings us to an example, and there's two types of demand, but that brings us to an example in today's environment. I want to talk about an example I just read in an article about eggs. The price of eggs in our retail stores recently, because of situations, has changed quite a bit. And so this article was about, what does demand for eggs look like? And today we have a great example because the prices of some commodities are changing quite a bit. As these prices change, we get a chance to observe what's the quantity change. And that tells us, do you have an elastic type of demand, inelastic type of demand, or just where are these products falling? So eggs right now, we've got a price. In fact, a little bit of the history, and I'm looking at a 2-week price report that I saw. And so it gave me some situation or some information to share with you. All right, a few weeks ago, the price one of eggs in the example I have was $1.72 a dozen. Now, this price of eggs has changed, and that price of eggs now has a P2, and so if you're writing these down with me, of $2.61 for that same dozen. So the prices have gone up. When prices go up, what does quantity do? Quantity goes back. Now, the question is, how much back? All right, well, because of the recent situation, I'm going to plug our quantities in and keep these in different color. When the price was Q1, or price was 1, quantity 1 during that same window of time reported by a store was, get the number right, I think it's 1,002 units were sold. Now, these are going to be basically dozens, but packs of dozens, but they measured in 1,000 units, so 1,002. The quantity after the price move changed, of course. Now, this changed for lots of reasons, supply and played a factor into it, but the quantity purchased was 868, and those were the values. All right, so when we talk about demand, looks like an elastic demand or an inelastic demand, these things are called elasticity of demand. And so let me write that as a formula. Elasticity of demand, elasticity of demand is equal to a formula. That formula of elasticity of demand is looking at a percent change in quantity, and that's how I'm going to write that percent. This triangle means change. Percent change in quantity over a percent change in price. So the question is, when price changes, how does that affect quantity? how big are the differences? In other words, how big are the changes in quantity when these prices move? And that's what this visual image is all about. But we have an example now. Let's calculate the values. Now I'm going to abbreviate this. Elasticity of demand is actually going to be, and there's different formulas for this, but I like to use the midpoint formula, meaning I'm trying to grab the middle between these two values as they change, so I can make the comparisons on each side. All right, so elasticity of demand has got a formula, and here it is. It's Q2 minus Q1. So I'm finding out how much did these quantities change first. And then I'm going to divide that by the two quantities added together, divided by 2. So that'll give me the middle value between those. And then this whole thing is going to get divided by the same thing with the prices. Price 2 minus price 1 divided by price 1 plus price 2 divided by 2. And I want to make sure I get my bracket set where I get that all correct. So that is your elasticity of demand formula. Now I want to plug in these numbers to it and see what answer we have for eggs. What kind of elasticity do eggs have at this time? All right, let's start with the quantity, since that's the one on top, and follow down in your notes here, and I'll do the same on my board. So remember, elasticity of demand is equal to, and we're going to start our work here with quantity. So in looking at quantity, we are looking at the quantity 2. So 868 minus the 1002. And I want to get that all done. And then I'm going to go ahead and divide that by those two things added together. And I like to do my math maybe a little slow, so you can be quicker than I am with this. But my quantity was 1002 plus the 868. And then I'm going to take all that stuff and divide it by 2 so that I get that answer. And that's going to be the math work I'm going to do there. Now let's divide all that, because in your formula, we're going to go ahead and get the price stuff plugged into here. Prices changed. Prices went at the 261 level. Make sure that's right, 261, yep, minus the $1.72 where they started. And so we've got the prices going up. And of course, we're going to divide all that by these prices added together. So 172 plus 261, and then divide all of that by 2. And then that's going to be our midpoint value. Okay? All right, so we're going to take all of those answers and bring them to the next stage. And so I'm going to carry my work up here in front of me. And so let's go ahead with our formula. So I'm curious about elasticity of demand, and I want to bring some of these answers over. So I've got kind of some of this work done for myself. So let me take a look at that. So elasticity of demand, I have got first this quantity, 868 minus this 1002 means that my quantity, I sold 134 units less. Now I kept the negative in here, but we'll talk about that. 868 minus the 1002 is 134, and I'm going to divide that by this midpoint. So 1002 plus 868, and it looks like for my math is going to be 935. So what that is, that's kind of the middle ground between these two quantities that I have. All right, now I'm going to take this and I am going to divide it by the rest of this formula, which is all about price now. And so in the price number, we're looking at the 261 minus the 172. And I think the answer is that is 0.89 or 89 cents. And that's a positive because the prices went up. So we're going to leave that there. We're going to draw a line underneath here, and we're going to find out that 1.72 plus 261 divided by 2, that answer, I believe, gives me 2.165. And of course, these are dollars because that's how much the money moved. All right, so then these are going to be, in my equation, worked out. And so I am going to come all the way across here, and let's deal with the top. So my elasticity of demand, when I run it across here and do the math, I end up with a 0.143, I believe, yep. And then over here on the bottom section, where I am doing my price numbers, I end up with a value of, run it across, 0.411. All right, so here's what we know, and in fact, I'm going to go back to my original formula. Elasticity of demand is trying to get the percent change in quantity over the percent change in price. Let's talk about that's a bad place to put a decimal, 0.143. We're going to move that up here and move that decimal 2 places over. That is 14.3%. And down here in the quantity, move the 2 decimals over, and that's going to be 41.1%. Now, when we do the math for this thing, in fact, I'll go down one more level. Elasticity of demand is equal to, if you do the math here, it's a 0.143 divided by a 0.41. So we know our answer is going to be not big, but small, right? This is a bigger number on the bottom, smaller number on the top. So when we divide that, we get a decimal value, and I'll keep it in blue here. That decimal value is a 0.34. Now, you're going to say, hold on, it's a negative. Demand is always negative. So really, when I go back to my original formula here, when we wrote all of this, I want to take the absolute value of this. That's what we call it in math. What do we call it in the real world here? Just forget about the negative. That's what that means. Drop it. Why? Because all of them are going to be negative. You've always got a negative relationship. But the value is a 0.34. And in fact, it is less than 1. So what do we call that? Which one of these lines does it look like? Which one of these lines shows a small change in quantity? Well, it's this one that's straight up and down. It's called inelastic. So the value of eggs is inelastic, meaning that consumers, when the price changes on them, in fact, it changed by 41%, that's on the bottom. 41% is the average price of eggs have gone up in a short 2 weeks because of our current environment. 41% is what the price went up by. Well, you would expect quantity to back way off. That's nearly double. Some cases, in the instances, the reports I saw are double. So nearly double. 41% is the price of the eggs have gone up. Quantity only dropped down by 14%. So that lets us know that we would call this an inelastic type of demand. And so what does that mean for consumers? That means that we're just going to keep doing what? We're going to keep buying it. That's what we're going to do. Why do we keep buying it? Because it's an inelastic demanded product. And that is our lesson for demand elasticity. Price and quantity have a negative relationship, but that relationship could be elastic, meaning people are really sensitive when the prices change. Or it could be inelastic, meaning people aren't very sensitive when prices change. And that's what we see here as an example of eggs. 41% change in price only causes them to buy 14% less. That means that they're not worried a whole lot about price. Well, that's what happens when you change prices on things like eggs. A lot of our ag products are actually inelastic as their demand out in the consumer area. Things where people are sensitive to price typically are things that are high-end items, things that aren't considered core to our being. So the idea of things like maybe automobiles or going out to eat at restaurants or other high-end electronics. Those are things that are not getting bought right now quite a bit because they are probably more sensitive to price changes. So as a marketing person, we need to understand what kind of product that we have. So some of the questions that we've gone over today are, what are the two different types of demand? And then what is the formula for elasticity of demand? Basically looking at how quantity changes when price changes. And then the results are, if it's less than 1, we call that inelastic. If it's, of course, more than 1, that would be an example of elastic. Hope this makes sense as far as understanding the elasticity of demand and applying a current example to that.